What's my blood type? Tito's. Yeah, because you didn't tell me about golf. I didn't know if Ricky and Zach played golf Sunday afternoon. He was trying to get me to play, and I was like exhausted.
Zach brought me a few new wedges, and let's just say
he brought you clubs.
Yeah, his old wedges. Very nice guy.
Ricky got hand-me-down clubs.
Well, my only other wedge is a hand-me-down that I bought at a golf shop 10 years ago for $10. So it was a major upgrade. Super
he
fat.
Felt bad for you?
Super fat grips.
I mean,
I'd go golf, but I don't have any clubs.
When you look at Ricky's clubs, I would give Ricky clubs, but I'm a lefty.
Whoa, I got some nice irons though.
Ricky's been feeling it
that
lately.
I bought off my friend.
Yeah. Fantasy football update. Scotty Two Hotties in the house. He's behind the cameras. Scott, the engineer. Scotty, I believe, is 3-1 this year right now. Low key sleeper going into the Cortland Line Company fantasy football draft. I don't think Scotty played fantasy football before this year. Now he's in like at least 3 leagues. Real cocky, super lippy now that he's 3-1 and he's hoarding quarterbacks. But just an update for all listeners out there. Ricky, Mr. Richard Nicoletti, is my co-host today along with my boy Nate Dogg. Ricky is 0-4.
Bad breaks
after last year starting, I think 6-0. Nate Dogg, excuse me, Nate Dogg, first year fantasy football player himself, is 2-2. And I am 2-2. We are going into week 5 of the NFL season and NFL fantasy season. There's going to be a lot of big games going on this weekend. And I'm going to have Scott pull the clip, but I remember, I think it was our last podcast, I asked Ricky what the Jets' overall record was going to be this year, and I believe he said 13-4 or 14-3.
No, 14-3.
14-3, and I asked Nate, because Ricky's a huge Jets fan and Nate's a huge Bills fan, and I asked Nate what the Bills were going. Nate said 14-3. They're both in the same division, in case you don't follow football, so that was going to be pretty tough, but
I'll give it to them. The Jets did. The Jets beat them.
They did. It was a very interesting game. So anyways, that's kind of where we're at with that. Ricky's got a lot of ground to make up. Although our VP of Sales and Marketing, Zach McKnight, he started, I think, 0-7 last year in our fantasy football league, and then went on a tear for 8 straight dubs to make the playoffs, in which he got squashed by me on back-to-back weeks. So it is possible. You have a lot of ground to make up at 0-4.
I have Jonathan Taylor coming off this week.
There's some guys coming off the IR, suspension.
When you put up 130 points, 140 points, and you lose,
yeah,
you didn't really lose.
Well,
you're stacking points.
One thing this year is our league's a little different. We had a 10-man league last year, and we added 2 more players this year in Scott, the engineer, and Nate Dogg. So when you go from a 10-man to a 2-man, you're talking about splitting up 16 more good players, amongst the whole group. So you really got to, look at the waiver list, look at the bench players, and try to come up with like a good squad. Because you have a guy that gets hurt, suspended in a 12-man league. It's pretty tricky. I was fishing with a guy this weekend. He's in a frat house in college. It's a 32-man fantasy league. I've never seen anything like it in my life. 32 people in the league.
How are they doing? They're probably doing defense.
No, dude, it's straight up like ours. It's a PPR 32-man league. So if you have a quarterback on a bye, you're basically screwed. Unless you have somebody like as a backup, what I mean? It was incredible. I mean, there's guys winning, weeks with like 45 points, 50 points. It was honestly, it was pretty funny. So, what is really funny this weekend, Sunday, is the Bills. Who do the Bills play?
Jacksonville.
The Bills play Jacksonville in London. Okay, London is way far ahead of us in terms of time frame versus East Coast time. All right, it's a Sunday game. In New York State, you are not allowed to serve alcohol on Sunday before 10 a.m. But
until this week.
Bills fans, for those of you that don't know, are crazy insane about the Bills. So the governor of New York State, she passed something, I don't know, a bill, not a law, whatever, that establishments could serve alcohol starting at 9 a.m. this Sunday.
I saw it was 8.
At 8 a.m.
I believe so, yeah.
Just for the Bills fans, which is honestly one of the funniest, most incredible things I've ever heard. Hopefully that Bills keep doing that every year, and it puts them in a tough position to make that. So yes, this Sunday only in New York State, you can now receive alcohol from an establishment starting at 8 a.m. for the Bills game. I believe it starts at 9:30 in the morning.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, if you're a hardcore football fan right now, and I'm not going to make this whole podcast about football, but you're talking about a 9:30 a.m. start and then wrapping it up with, an 8 p.m. Sunday game. It's nothing but football this weekend. So anyways, thought that was interesting. Ricky, you are going to the Beast of the East tournament this afternoon, this weekend.
Hour and 40 minutes.
Hour and 40 minutes of what?
Until I leave.
All right, so we're going to wrap this up. Tell us, what's the Beast of the East tournament? Where is it? What's it all about? I know Cortland is a sponsor this year. Give us a breakdown of that. We are entering Cortland team in it. You and Brovey,
yep.
Matt Brovey.
Yep, Salt City Snipers representing Syracuse, New York. I believe it's been going on for like 8 or 9 years now. This year there's 84 people participating. You can have a team of two to three.
Okay.
Only 2 people can be fishing at a time though, which I thought was cool. I mean, especially if you're fishing the lake there.
Where is it?
It's on the Allegheny, the reservoir. I think it's the Tionesta Reservoir,
Northwest PA, basically.
Yeah, it's so it's actually a pretty small reservoir. But yeah, Barovia and myself will be there on his raft.
I thought you were in the river. It's on a res, huh?
No, well, there's 2.
Oh, really?
You can go on the res, or you can go on the river.
You can do either one in the tournament?
You can do either one, and they run shuttles for you too, so it makes it really easy on everybody. Great group of guys that are putting it together. Really excited to see all the CVS guys, Shenango Valley Shenanigans podcast team. They'll be competing, but it's going to be a great event. It's only fly fishing, muskies only. There's no treble hooks, so practicing pretty safe.
Probably tons of rules, standard with tournaments.
Yeah, just overall management of it looks awesome.
So we're a sponsor. What are we sponsoring? Like what's that? Does that entail? Because you kind of handled that.
Yeah. So this year for all the captain's bags, they are gonna every captain bag. So team, every person will get a spool of our 35-pound Tybal stainless steel.
Nice.
Yeah, and then we have a bunch of raffle items, bringing a bunch of other musky lines, some samples, some of the new 50-pound core tropic lines, some of those too for the guys that are venturing off in the Midwest in the summer for next year. So it's gonna be really.
So does that start tomorrow, or is the? So
yeah,
is
so
it a 2-day?
So it's like a 4.5-hour drive from here. So I think the captain's meeting's at like 7:30, and then it starts tomorrow at 6 a.m.
And Saturday too, or no?
Yeah.
What's the weather looking like over there for this?
Terrible.
Terrible.
Yeah. It flips. It goes to like 55 and raining and blowing like 10 miles an hour from the south for 2 days straight. So I don't think they've received rain over there for weeks. So
that's kind of what I was getting at, because it's like,
I think the river is going to be a safe play though, just considering I don't know.
The dam.
Fish underneath those dams
for sure.
Be pretty,
we've been setting
regularized
records here in central New York where Cortland is located. I think yesterday we set a record. It's basically been 75 to 80 degrees and sunny with zero precipitation for the last 4 weeks. That all ends tomorrow. I think we're supposed to get a 1/4 inch of rain tomorrow, 1 inch of rain Friday night, 1/2 inch Saturday, 1/2 inch Saturday night, it's summer's over, basically, is what I'm saying. So
I think this happened to them last year too. So this is the first year that we're going to be going out and competing and helping out.
Would you rather the weather be the way it's going to be this weekend, or would you rather it be high sun, nice calm, high pressure, the way it is right now? Or do you not know? Or musky or musky?
I feel like for Matt and myself, we've never fished the Allegheny going in there when the weather's all kind of screwy is like a better chance for us to.
I would agree with that.
To have a shot.
Yeah.
Versus just like consistent conditions where the locals.
Could those guys pre-fish?
Yeah.
So those guys have probably been pre-fishing for the last, let's say, even week or 2 or 3 weeks. And they typically have the same weather we do. I mean, they're 4 hours away. They're a little west of us. So it's been, 75 sunny, no wind for 4 weeks. Well, things change when it goes, to 55, blowing sideways, a half inch of rain. So you're probably right. Everything that
they're going to be feeling it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything those guys had dialed in, in the exception of, the river and reservoir situations are a little different as far as targeting muskie where they live. You know what I mean?
I think Friday we'll fish pretty consistent to what they've been having for the last couple of weeks. But I think Saturday, once the water temps, if they drop a couple degrees, you'll definitely see them slow down.
For sure.
But I don't know. It's pretty crazy how much muskies will eat when the water is warm versus when it starts to cool. They immediately.
It's interesting. Does the moon phase? Where are we at?
It was just a full moon a
week ago.
Last
Not
Saturday,
even. Yeah.
So I don't think it's great. I know for the Treelands tournament they just had out. I think it's in Wisconsin. Team Muskie Fool placed second on that one. Thorn Bros, I think, took the first. But they had a full moon lineup and like the scores were crazy.
Really?
It looked like everybody was crushing them. So I'm excited. I don't know what the numbers will shake out for this weekend, but coming off a full moon, it's not like directly right after it. It's a week, so hopefully they're kind of starting to return to their normal habits.
And what do you have? So Beast of the East tournament this weekend. Big fantasy football weekend for the Cortland guys. You got any sales travel coming up?
Tuesday, fly out to Muskie actually. Fly out to Minnesota. Get there Tuesday morning, and then I start coming back east to Cortland.
Nice
for like a week.
And then you do anything after that before Thanksgiving, Christmas?
Then I have a break for a couple weeks, and then I do Richmond, Virginia, and down to Savannah.
Coastline, southeast.
The whole coastline.
Nice.
So that will be great. I mean, I timed it a little better this year where the red fishing should be absolutely on fire.
You have to.
In the fall, creeks will clear up, just fish kind of school up a little bit, and I'm excited. I mean, I remember last year I went down there, I think it was a full month earlier than this year, and it was like just starting, but it's just a great place to be in the fall.
For sure.
I mean,
you definitely want to time your trips during
North Carolina too. Like all the Albies will hopefully still be kicking around off Cape Lookout. So it's definitely a fishy time of the year to go down the coast, and it's obviously like slow season. So all the hotels and places to stay are affordable where you want to be. So it's exciting.
Beast of the East, sales travel. Nate, when are you helping me put my screen doors in on my breezeway? Because that's the only thing that you need to do for the next month. We'll figure that out after the show. But yes, I am tasking Nate. I am a terrible carpenter. I'm not a measure twice, cut once kind of guy. I'm more or less just hire Nate, pay him to do it. And
wait till we get this house under my belt.
Well, we're gonna do this before your house because I really do need some front doors on my porch. So anyways, folks, welcome to the program. This is Cortland Hooked, the podcast. I'm your host, Brooks Robinson. Like I mentioned before, I'm here with Richard Nicoletti, my boy Nate Dogg, Scott McCann, Scott the engineer. Scotty Too Hottie is behind the cameras today. I was thinking about a lot of different topics that we could go over, in-house, but I think one of them that we really haven't discussed and we should have discussed so far, because we are a line manufacturer, both in braided line and fly line, is just kind of fly line design, right? And how we design lines, why we design lines, how fly line design has evolved in the last, so many years. I know, Richard, how long have you been with the company now? 6 years, 7, somewhere in there?
Yeah.
I've been here for 11 years. I know Nate's been here for over 20 years. I actually personally started out in the manufacturing department making fly lines. So I have a lot of background. You guys are both super fishy. You've been involved in the industry for long enough. So I think kind of where I wanted to go with this is more or less to just break down for our listeners out there of just tapers and grains and how those two things correlate with one another in also talk about like rod development over the years, right? I'm talking going way back to where we are today. So I think there's a lot of confusion out there with, hey, this line is great, but it doesn't match up with this rod. Why is that? And so on and so forth. So I was going to kind of generalize a lot of the discussion today. Just, I don't want to, you could go down like a path of just tapers or just grains or just this, but I wanted to give the listeners just an idea of just to get them thinking, right? Don't just look at something, hey, this says 5-weight, I should put it on my 5-weight, right? But why? Right. We do a good job and other manufacturers do a good job of showing the profiles of line tapers, showing the grain weights of line tapers, right? And describing the rods that the rod manufacturers build and why they're building. Are they, a fast, stiff rod for larger flies, windy conditions? Or is it a softer tip for a presentation type, rod and so on? So I really just wanted to, like I said, generalize some of the discussion. Get our listeners to start to look at certain things like tapers, like grain weights, how they apply to certain rods for certain fisheries, for certain applications. So that's really why I just wanted to have you guys in here. I know that, Richard, you're a sales rep. You sell a lot of, saltwater lines and freshwater lines. You do a lot of musky fishing yourself. I'm the same way. I know Nate's been here forever. Nate's a big bass fisherman with fly rods in the summertime. He's done the whole Florida thing. He's done the whole trout stuff. So, and Nate has been and is our rod designer. So I think you guys are obviously the best people to have in here. And also, yes, we are a line manufacturer. So of course, we're going to be kind of a good voice for the listeners out there on this discussion. So, it's kind of like, where do you start with line design? And it kind of has to go along with rod development as well. Back in the day, it was bamboo rods were the only thing out there, right? And then glass rods came about, and then graphite rods came about, and then new versions of graphite have come about. So, lines, have had to progress with rods as rod technology has progressed. So it's really just material wise of rods that have evolved, like I said, bamboo to glass to graphite, and then different grades of graphite. So rods over time, they become lighter, they become stronger, they become faster, they become less whippy, I should say. Pick up a glass rod at any fly shop or any store for that matter, and compare it to a graphite rod. There's a lot of difference in them. So how do you build lines to match all these? And then how does the rods, how have they evolved? How have lines evolved? And, I really wanted to chat about this because there's definitely like a disconnect between some lines and how they perform on some rods. And, like I said before, and I'll use this example, throughout the show is I'll just use the 5-weight, right? The 5-weight is probably the most popular fly rod size, 5s and 8s in general. So I'll kind of refer to a 5-weight or an 8-weight or some other, sizes throughout the show. But how come when I buy a 5-weight line and I put it on this brand new 5-weight rod, why doesn't it perform well versus maybe another brand or another type of line? And it has to do with a lot with grains, right? So, and you guys can chime in whenever you want. All right. If I start going down a path and you want to chat about something. So, better versions of graphite over the years, from the glass, from the bamboo days. So lines are built to a standard. There is a standard of fly line design. I think it's the AFMA standard fly lines, right? There's literally a graph that you can look up on Google if you type in AFTA fly line standards. And basically what that is, and I printed out the sheet, although I know it by heart, is just line weights and what the grains of those fly lines are supposed to weigh at 30 feet. For example, and I'll use this again, so just so everyone knows, a 5-weight fly line. The standard 5-weight fly line is to be weighed at 140 grains at 30 feet. Okay. So what's happened is over the years, as rod materials have progressed and things have evolved is rods have just gotten a little bit faster over time, right? From your bamboo days to your glass days to your graphite, like I said. At some point in time, probably a little bit before my time, probably when you were really involved in Cortland before I got here, you could see the industry in terms of fly lines having to kind of chase rod flexes, right? So totally. Back in the day, you know, when the graphite rods came out, let's say it's a 5-weight, you would put a 5-weight line on there and it's like, man, this isn't really loading the rod. It doesn't really jive with it. Well, line design has kind of had to chase the rod design and the invention of the new rods and the new materials, where we're starting to put, you know, 6-weight standard fly lines on a 5-weight rod to make them jive together. So a 6-weight weighs 160 grains at 30 feet, right? But how come I have to put a 6-weight line on a 5-weight rod? So I think it just kind of got out of hand a little bit over time when, you know, manufacturers of rods, and they were coming out with, let's say, a 5 or a 6-weight, but it was really like a 6-weight or a 7-weight, right? And people would pick them up and they'd say, "Ooh, wow, that's a really fast, that's really light, that's really cool." But the line stopped jiving with it. So go ahead, Nate.
The issue, I mean, basically what it comes down to, that I don't think a lot of people realize this, is that the only standard for any of this is the fly line.
Sure.
The fly line is the only thing that you can literally weigh,
sure,
if you want to say,
yep,
to say this is whatever, a 5-weight,
a standard,
a 6-weight,
yep,
a standard. Okay. Yep. There is nothing out there in terms of rods that you could take a rod and measure it in a certain
deflection chart, whatever. Yeah.
Way,
yeah, to
say this is what it is. Okay. So all of that basically comes down to the specific manufacturer saying, okay, we're going to call this a 5. We're going to call this a 6. We're going
right.
to call this whatever. So when all of that starts getting kind of pushed to the boundaries of, you know, what somebody may be using or the specific thing that they're going after for a specific rod or whatnot, like it started taking these standards and just like pushing them to the boundaries.
Sure.
So that's when, you know, as you explained, some of these things you put on it, like, hey, this is great, I love this line, but I need to like put a 6-weight on this just to make it load or
sure.
whatever. It's just, so that's something that I think a lot of people don't understand, is that, you know, when it comes down to it, you know, unfortunately, you know, and we hear it sometimes, is that, you know, the line gets blamed 90% of the time.
Sure.
You know, this line didn't work with my rod. Well, really, it comes down to the rod
isn't 5
isn't working for the line.
Sure. Or vice versa. All right. And we'll get into line design and taper design and grain weights as this goes on. But I think I just wanted to generalize like where this has progressed and where it is today.
I feel like a reason why it's progressed so quickly is just because like the boundaries of fly fishing has grown so
sure.
much over the last 20 years. Like
pushing the limits of...
I mean, just technique specific, you know, like having an overweighted line to throw streamers, throw musky flies.
Look at the size of flies. Look at the size. Yeah,
you couldn't do that with a
look at the size of musky flies today. Were those like that 25 years? I mean, maybe some guys, but that's even standard nowadays. Is the size of those lines? You need a stiffer rod, a faster rod, a heavier rod. So we'll get into like taper designs and longer tapers versus shorter tapers. As well as grain weights, you know, true grain weights versus overloading, why you would. I want the listeners to just think more and look into it more. And when you purchase a rod and you don't get the right, you know, the line that you have doesn't match rod, well, why? We'll just, you know, listen and just try to, you know, educate yourself a little bit on this discussion. So thank you for saying that, Nate. But that's kind of, you know, where we're at today. And I'll use this example, and I've used it in the past and maybe a podcast or two, but there's some like I look at two-handed rods, right? Or I use this example all the time, like, because I'm a big bow hunter. When you buy a bow, on the cam of the bow, it tells you what grain weight arrow to purchase to match with that bow. And then you go over to the arrow shelf and you buy that grain of arrow, and it functions and it works. A lot of two-handed rods have a grain window on the rod. It says this switcher spay rod jives with this grain, right? But single-handed rods, they don't really do that, with the exception of, there's some specific ones, a lot of, some musky stuff, right? Some stuff like that.
But even those don't really say it on the rod.
So my point is like there's, a standard in weight, but it's really comes down to grains, right? And like I said, the bow hunting, I use that application a lot, or that reference a lot, because that's what I do. And it's easy. When I go buy a new bow, it says what grain weight or grain arrow to have. You go over to the arrow shelf or the fly line shelf, and you pick that off the shelf, and it matches and it functions, right? And it works. So grain weights, like I said, there's a standard, and you can look them up from everything from, a 1 weight right up through a 16 weight or whatnot. So I think we've done a good job on the back of the box and on the website. Every single fly line we have has a rod weight listed, right? And then a grain weight listed. Sometimes they are true to standard. The 5 weight says 140, the 6 weight says 160, and so on and so on. Sometimes we have 5 weights that are a half size heavy or a full size heavy. And why is that? So that's kind of what I wanted to get into next is like tapers, and where grains and tapers jive together based on the fishery or the application or the method, right? So we make a ton of different tapers. I couldn't tell you how many different tapers we make and other manufacturers make, and why those tapers are the way they are, right? We make very short, compact tapers that are, let's say, 26 feet long. And we make long belly tapers that are 60 feet long. We make lines that are in the middle that are 40 feet long, like the Tropic All-Purpose that I'll use an example later. So it really depends on where you're fishing, what you're fishing for, and how you're going to fish for that species, like tarpon or bonefish, for example, right? There's a lot of the times you need to make pretty long casts, so you probably want a longer taper, right? Versus some other applications where you don't have a lot of back cast room, you have a really large fly, it's super windy, or maybe you're fishing a shoreline where you don't need a long taper, you just need a nice short one, right? So how do grains jive with tapers, based on short and long tapers? So like I said, the Tropic All-Purpose, it's a great line. We sell it. Guys love it. It's a true line size, right? At 30 feet, I just weighed an 8 weight, right? 200, and there's a variance that in the standard, right? It's plus or minus, 5 or 8 grains, whatever. It's still considered true. 210 grains is a true 8 weight line, right? At 30 feet. That particular taper is 41 feet long. So I cut it at 41 feet. I weighed the whole head. It weighed just shy of 290 grains. Okay. So if you're fishing and using the whole taper, right, to make a long cast, whether you're tarpon fishing, bone fishing, maybe you're dry fly fishing out of a boat, like at a big, at a longer distance, you're actually fishing with 290 grains or 288 grains exactly out of the rod tip the whole time, right? 41 feet of taper. But the 30-foot benchmark is 210 grains. So when you look at short, compact tapers that we build and other manufacturers build, typically you'll see them much oversized compared to what the standard is. Like we have a new line coming out called the Tropic Plus All-Purpose XP, okay? It's 26 feet long. That's the head length from the front taper to the rear taper. The 8 weight that we put on that box is 280 grains. And you might say, well, isn't an 8 weight 210? Yeah, it is at 30 feet, correct. What that line is designed to do, okay, in certain situations where if you have limited back cast room, okay, where you can't carry 41 feet of fly line plus a tapered leader, that is a great line to purchase, okay, as a short, compact head where you're not going to carry 41 feet of line and making long casts. But when you have 88, 290 grains on a 41-foot taper, we apply that to a line that's tapered at 26 feet. So you're getting the same load on your 8 weight at 26 feet as you would on your 8 weight at 41 feet. So when you're purchasing fly lines, think about what you're going to do with that fly line. Where are you going fishing? What are you fishing for? What are the casting techniques or applications that you need to apply to that fish, right? If I'm going to go dry fly fishing on a big river, I'm probably going to want to pick a line with a long taper, okay? If I'm going to go trout fishing, maybe dry fly fishing, doesn't matter, on a small creek, you don't need a fly line that has a 41 50-foot taper, right? You're not going to carry that much line. You probably don't have that much back cast room even to do so. And the same thing applies for saltwater fishing as well. You know, are you going to be combing shorelines for redfish or other species where, you know, you're 30, 40, 50 feet from a shoreline versus, you know, tarpon fishing or bone fishing or other species where you might need to make a 60-foot cast, right? And the same thing for dry fly fishing, like I said, on a big river. You know, there's times where you're going to have a shorter cast, but there's times where you need to make a long cast. You probably don't want to pick a short, compact taper for those types of scenarios. So how do grain weights apply into the taper mix? And that's where really like line design comes about based on fisheries and applications, which I mentioned. Like I use the all-purpose as an example of a long taper that's a true line size versus the XP that we're coming out with, which is a really short compact taper, but it's almost 2 line sizes heavy, right? Both of those are going to function and jive just perfectly if you use them correctly in the right way for whatever the application or fishery is. So there's a lot that goes into line design, but it really just boils down to, you know, application, fishery, and whatnot. And it also has to do with a lot of rods, right? So what I've seen even in the last like 11 years with kind of the rod development and lines kind of having to chase the rods, right, in order to function. Like if Cortland only made true line sizes, right, in the last 10 years, the amount of rods that have come about that are stiffer than what they say they are, our lines just wouldn't jive with them perfectly. You know what I mean? And people be like, your lines are great, but they just don't load this rod. So we've kind of have to conform to that, which is fine. And we make both true line sizes, overloaded line sizes. It's just, I want you, the listeners, to get out there and just start thinking about really what you're going after, what you're doing with it, what kind of rod do you have, look at tapers, look at grains, how do they apply towards the rod that you have and the species that you're going after, right? So there's different, it's kind of hard to say, but the second discussion really is grain weights in the rods, right? So like I look at like our Trout Boss line, right? I think it's about a 30-foot taper. It's a full size heavy. It's ideal for, you know, your short to mid-range type casting versus your finesse trout 2 or your ultralight, which is more to open up a super long cast. And then I look at like our saltwater lines like the XP versus some of the tarpon lines. Basically what you want to do is, like I said, look at the species you're going after. Is it going to be a short range cast, a mid range cast? What type of flies are you throwing? Are you throwing big streamers? You're going to want a little more deeper load, a little more power. Or are you finesse fishing for dry flies, right? In taper design, typically longer tapers, they're going to have a little bit more easier presentation on them versus shorter tapers, which are going to have more power. You're going to be able to slap down a streamer a little bit better compared to a longer taper. So I think, I mean, I don't know if you have anything to add to that in terms of, you know, taper design versus grain weights versus.
I think people just, I think you did a great job kind of summarizing it, but just understanding your fishery. I mean, for us, you know, Central New York, we have a lot of rivers that have, you know, great sized browns in them, and we have an opportunity in the spring, not so much in the fall, but to go streamer fish for them. And like majority of our waters that are bigger require specific presentation of your streamer.
Sure.
You can't just slap an oversized line down in this bucket and expect the fish just to roll on it. You have to, you know, bend into it, roll, you know, get that presentation as parallel as possible, sweep across the river, and just like everything's kind of just different. So in that situation, you really just have to just kind of think about how you're going to be fishing for them and like what you can get away with and find that happy medium. Because not every streamer line is meant for every river. Not every trout line's made for every river. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind with the Trout Boss being an oversized kind of compact trout design is it's like kind of like our most popular, like versatile do it all.
Sure.
Because it can. But when I think of like dry fly fishing, it's chubbies. You're in the meadows, you're out in the west, you're throwing, max 10 to 20, 30 foot drifts. You're
air resistant hoppers. Yep.
Yeah. In that situation, you're still dry fly fishing like you would here in the Northeast,
sure,
but you need something that is going to turn over properly and load your rod within that 10, 15
You're not throwing a size 22 trico.
But if you're fishing the Delaware and you bring that Trout Boss and now the fish are so pressured, you're fishing 6X, 7X, and you are
with real small flies,
and you're positioned 50 feet upriver of the fish.
Yep.
And you're in the front of the boat, and you got your buddy on the sticks and your other buddy in the back, watching you try to hold up freaking 60 feet of that oversized line over their head, and they're ducking every time.
Yep.
Because your rod cannot hold that much weight in the air,
and the line's not built for that.
It's not built for that.
Sure.
Versus a true line size where when you do need a hold past 30 feet, it's stable. And that's the biggest thing, is just understanding presentation, technique specific areas where like what's going to allow you to be as effective as possible.
I agree.
And it's really confusing. And like the next thing that I know you kind of touched on is just with the grains, is understanding grains do not equal sink rate. And that's like a whole other part of the.
I remember when we came out with the compact sink series years ago, guy was like, I think it was on like Cape Cod fishing. I was like,
I need a 350 grain sink. And it's like,
he's like, what are you fishing? I'm like, fishing a 350 grain, like short compact floating line. He's like, how is it 350, but it floats, right? Grains are just grains. It has nothing to do with density. And I think things have really evolved in line design over the last like 10 years, where I think guys can conceptualize that and look at that. But I think a general rule of thumb, if you are choosing a line, right? And I'll apply this to both, let's say, dry fly fishing and certain saltwater. If you're going to cast at a distance, right? A good distance, 40, 50, 60 feet, and you need to have a line lay out and not slam the water properly, right? Typically a true line size is going to be your best friend. Okay. If you're trying to fish for bonefish on the flats that are tailing, or laid up tarpon, or dry fly fishing, a larger river, true line sizes with a longer taper are going to be your best friend. Okay. And the complete opposite, if you're fishing for, maybe stripers that are just blitzing, right? And it's windy. Okay. Mm-hmm. A short compact line that's a little overweighted is going to be your best friend, right? Those fish are not going to spook. You're going to need to punch something through the wind, right?
Yep.
And you want to get a quick cast back out there. Now, are there cases where you can use a true line size that's a long taper for 100%? But you don't need to. No. All right. So that's kind of like my general rule for those of you listening that are going to look into purchasing a new fly line, is what are you going to be doing with it? And like I said, are you going to be long range to mid range dry fly fishing or saltwater casting? Pick a line that's a true line size. You're going to carry a lot of line, and it's going to load your rod properly. Are you going to be fishing tight, short, heavy cover trout streams? Maybe you're going to be jungle fishing, for Dorado. And I hope if you're going to spend money on that trip that you know what kind of line you're going to be buying well in advance. But my point is you're not going to be carrying a lot of line. So picking a shorter compact taper that's overlined is going to be a better option for you.
And as well as just when you are going to buy a new line, and you're looking at this taper chart that looks like nothing you've ever seen before. I mean, it has lines and dots and triangles that are longer than others. You're like, what the hell is this? Focus on where the back taper is, because where the back taper is most likely the load point where that line's going to perform.
That's what it was designed for. Yep.
At the low point. So, our tarpon taper, 41 foot, tarpon fishing, typically sending 60, 80 foot casts out at a distance. The low point's at 41 feet.
Yep.
That allows you to carry 41 feet plus close to
You're
30,
gonna
40,
shoot
50 feet of running.
But also too, whether you're holding something in the air or you're just shooting it too.
Exactly.
Yeah, typically the shorter compact lines are meant to shoot, right? Quick load,
1-2 false casts,
dump it.
Yeah.
You know, longer taper meant to carry more line in the air, precise loop control, and lay a fly out, you know, at a certain speed so it's not slamming the water, like I said, spooking dry fly fish or tailing bones. There's definitely a lot, and I'm glad you brought that up, that has to go into that. I mean, I think that's really why I just wanted to talk about like line design, like you said, and getting people thinking about, you know, when they're looking at tapers and looking at grains and how to apply them to a certain fishery.
Scott, and again, grains do not equal sink rate.
Yes.
Density.
Look at your density.
A 500 floating grain line is the same weight and loads the rod the same as a 500 grain. Sink
Correct.
8, sink 4, intermediate.
Just one floats, one sinks at a different rate.
Yes, that's it. That's it.
So I think that's, you know, again, you could go down a path of just line designs or just grains and how they apply. But until, you know, it's like I said, I've used that bow reference in the past. I think the only thing that this is hurting and it's a disconnect is just the industry, and it's the kind of beginner novice angler, right? You go in and you're like, hey man, I'm going to buy the most expensive, best rod in this shop and the most expensive, best fly line in this shop. Hopefully that shop manager or owner jives those two things together, right?
I sure hope so.
But you know, you might not. And you're like, what's going, like, I know I'm kind of new to this. And what I'm saying is it might not be your fault. Yeah. You might buy a great rod. You might buy the best fly line, right? But if those two things don't jive together in terms of your casting distance, right? Your application, the line weight, grains, taper, and what that rod was built to do, it might not be your fault.
Right.
Even if
it doesn't all work together.
Yes. Even if you suck at casting, even if you are a great caster and you buy this, you know, rod XYZ, right? And line XYZ. If those two things don't jive together, it is not going to perform the way you want it to perform.
You're going to blame the line or you're going to blame the rod.
One of the two.
And I cannot tell you the amount of times where people don't understand the line is the issue. They've had the line on the reel for 20 years. It's starting to crack. It's about the rod. Up. It's all about the rod. It's all about the rod. And it's like, if you put a fresh line on this rod, this whole setup will just like magically like get 10,000 times better to work with.
And, you know, there's nothing wrong with overloading a rod. I will say this. If you are a beginner or a novice caster, there's nothing wrong with putting a 6-weight line on a 5-weight rod or a 5-weight line and a 4-weight rod. No. Until you get the proper line speed, it is kind of tricky to understand how those two things jive together. And there's also a factor of like, are you wade fishing, right? So we fish the upper Delaware system a lot, and you have to wade out to these fish because they're a long ways away if we're not in a drift boat, okay? Mm-hmm. When you're thigh deep or waist deep, right, you're about 2 feet lower than where you would be if you were on shore. Now think about if you're on the bow of a skiff on a platform. How high up above the water are you? 4 feet, right?
2 to 4 feet.
At least, yeah. Right? So take a guy that's wade fishing thigh deep, and then take a guy that's standing on the bow of a casting platform on a skiff. That's the difference of 6 feet, okay? When you look at your, like, let's say your back cast and your loop unfolds. When someone's standing 6 feet higher than you, that line has a lot more time to unfold behind you to make a proper cast. So take that into consideration. Are you going to be fishing from a boat, right, on the bow of a skiff? Are you going to be wading waist deep? My point is, it's hard to carry 50 feet of line when you're waist deep versus carrying 50 feet of line when you're 4 feet above the water on a bow of a skiff. It's typically why you see a lot of good saltwater casters choosing true line sizes, is because it's easier for them to carry a lot more line, which adds more grains to the rod, which is easier to load. So there's all these factors that go in, and not to confuse anyone that's, a beginner or a novice or just getting into it. It's just break it down and simplify it. Like, what am I going to do? What is my fishery? What kind of line based on this discussion I just listened to is best for me? Look at tapers. What is the rod that I have? There's a lot of rod manufacturers that I've seen the rods getting toned down over the last 5 or 6 years than prior to that. Like when I first got into the industry, it was like, how fast and stiff can we make this rod and still call it an 8-weight, right? And over the last few years, I mean, there's some companies out there that have never gone that direction. Like Scott Fly Rods does a great job. Like from what I've seen and all the rods that I've fished and casted for them, they're pretty true to flex. TNT, they're pretty true to flex. There's some rod manufacturers that have come out with really stiff rods and they have really, true rods. Mm-hmm. So not every rod is created equal in terms of flex. And that's something that, your fly shop should explain to you. You should do a little research. Is this built for fast? Is it for finesse? And then kind of jiving a line along with that. And if you're still confused, you can always send us an email at info@Cortland Line. Scotty is new to fly fishing, in the last 2-3 years? You know what I mean? I remember when Scott first started fishing in the springtime a couple years ago, and he had the 444 Peach line. And I'm like, how's it going? He's like, it's great. And I was like, bring your rod in. And I slapped a streamer line on there that was shorter, compact, and overloaded. And it was early in the season, and streamers were still a thing. And he comes back the next day. I'm like, how is that? He's like, dude, way better. And I'm like, here's why. You got a true line size with a little longer taper versus a short, compact streamer line that's overloaded. And the creek that Scotty and I were fishing was like, 40 feet across, you know what I mean? Yeah. With limited backcast room. So that streamer line was a better scenario for that situation. But until someone explains that to you, you're just kind of like, maybe I suck at casting. Maybe I'm just not a good caster. It's not. You got to jive the right line with the right rod in the right scenario. Then you get into like the fly situation. It's easier to cast a size 22 trico, for example, than it is a musky fly. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Line speed has a lot to do with the load of the rod. So there's all these factors that go into choosing the right line with the right rod per the application. And that stuff just takes time. That stuff takes experience. I started somewhere. I mean, I've been here for 11 years. I thought I was a pretty good caster. And then I started coming to Cortland and watching these other guys. I was like, wow, I suck. And then I started going and doing these things. Like I started getting into the saltwater fishing with bigger flies, with sinking lines. I started musky fishing. And I was just like, this line that I have and this rod I thought was going to be good, it's just not working. And so it's a lot of it is experience. Talk to your guys at the fly shop. They know what's going on per their fishery. That's probably your local fishery. Do some research. You should research anything that you're going to spend, $200, $300, $400, $500 on a fly rod, $60, $100, $130 on a fly line. You should do a little research on what you're purchasing. You got anything else to add, Nate? I know that's a lot, but you're the more experienced than all of us when it comes to this. You know what I mean?
In terms of just seeing how it's progressed over the years. I remember this was probably over 20 years ago. We had a series that the whole concept of everything we've been talking about, we were discussing, 20 years ago, and how to do all that. We introduced a line series that actually had like half weights.
It said 4.5 weight on it. Correct.
Right. And it was like, I guess at the time, just trying to convey the message and all of that,
it was too soon.
It was too soon. And it's like the concept of it and trying to get the point across with everything we've discussed here, it was like, the theory was there, the idea was there, but it was just getting the point across was like a lot harder. This was before the internet, before YouTube, before anything, so it's like,
and if you called a 4-weight a 5-weight or vice versa, you'd probably get in trouble. I think 20 years ago.
that's where we get away with it now, is like,
it's like standard.
If the line is overweighted, right, as a 4-weight or a 5-weight, it still says 4-weight on the box, right?
Right.
It still says 4-weight on the sticker, but on the grain weight chart on the back, your 4-weight is 130 30 grains, right? Your 5 weight, if it's a half line size heavy, right? Your 5 weight's 150 or whatever the case may be. That's where I think there's a little bit of disconnect, is like the rod weight or the line weight, and the actual grain weight. So those are things that you're going to need to look at when you're purchasing a line. Mm-hmm. What does the line weight say it is? And what is the actual grain weight? Like the Tropic Plus All Purpose versus the Tropic Plus All Purpose XP stands for extra power. You know what I mean? They both say 8 weight. Look at the grain weight chart.
What are they for?
What are they for? What am I doing with this? Mm-hmm. Why do I need a short, compact, overweighted taper versus this longer 41-foot true line size?
And like you said, just the whole putting everything together as a complete package, knowing the rods. I mean, everybody makes like awesome rods these days.
It's hard to make a shitty rod right now.
Right.
It's really hard.
Yeah, and just remember that point too. Again, that when it comes to the standards and the weights and things like that, just, like you said, do some research, talk to people, understand exactly what you're getting for the rod and what you need to match with that rod to make it perform and do what you want to do with it. So
agree. Unfortunately, I think the only thing that this is hurting is just kind of your entry level, even your intermediate level anglers. The disconnect between the line weights and the rod flexes. Like you said, there's kind of a standard in almost everything but a rod flex. You know what I mean? And like, what comes first, like the rod flex or the line design? You know what I mean? And and it's just something that I think, as long as we as a line manufacturer just make consumers aware, and look into and discuss, I think will help people make a better decision, put the right line on the right rod, or a better line on the right rod, and have a better experience overall. That's really just what we're trying to do, is just get you thinking and have a better experience overall. You can buy the most expensive gear, but if your things don't jive together, you're going to look like Scotty out there with the wrong line on a streamer with a 40-foot creek and wondering what's going on. But it did work, did it not? Scotty's shaking his head, yes. And so that was my little test. I was like, Scotty, bring that peach line over. Not that the peach line's bad. It has its purpose. Throwing a big heavy streamer on a tiny creek versus the streamer was not it. You know what I mean? So it's just, those are the types of things, I just get your mind thinking, generalize it. You know what I mean? Look at your tapers, look at your grains, talk to your fly shop managers, read as much as you can, and make the best educated decision. And if you don't know, and you're looking at a Cortland line to purchase, and you're like, man, this is my fishery, this is my application, this is what I'm going to do, and this is my price level, just shoot us an email. Scott can help you out. Ricky can help you out. Nate can help you out. There's one good thing about Cortland is, between Matt and Scott and Ricky, myself and Nate and Chris, there are probably what I consider 6 experts here that will help you match a line to your rod. And we all fish different rods too. Like Matt loves certain brands. You do. I do. We have our own brands. You know what I mean? You have a bunch of, old schools. Stuff. Yeah. Like like every Hardy rod from back in the day. So, and luckily, we do a lot of shows. So we were able to cast a lot of different brands of rods out there, because I want to know what every rod or every line that we make, what that fishes and pairs well with. So when we get this type of discussion, hey, I have a TFO XYZ or a Hardy or a Sage or a Scott, we know what line you should apply that. So just shoot us an email if you can't make an educated decision and you're like, hey, I'm going to spend some good money here. What should I do? And we'll try to help. So you cool with that? You got anything to add on that?
No, I guess the only other thing I'd say is in terms of lines, mentioned it before, just take care of your stuff. Like you guys said, it's, lines will last you. Just make sure every once in a while you give it a good cleaning and put some dressing on it.
Yep.
And stretch it once in a while.
Store them properly.
If you got a line with a mono core, you're gonna want to stretch that thing. So it's
the new comparison for me when I go into a shop is like, listen, like you got $20 extra, or what are those fancy socks? The Darn Tough socks.
Oh yeah.
Do you wash those socks?
Sure.
Do you put them in the washer?
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you gotta, whatever you use in life, you gotta take care
You
of.
treat your gear.
Yeah. And if you're gonna let your fly line just sit dirty on a reel, I don't care if you're fishing a clear reservoir or river, like there's dirt and dust on that line that's breaking down PVC.
Especially if you're fishing, in the northern part of the US. Like, you could be a hardcore steelhead angler, musky guy, right? But a lot of us that dry fly fish, like that rod and reel or that line's going to go away in October, might not see daylight until April.
Store them clean.
I remember a comment that Jordan made like years ago in reference to like
Michael Jordan. Yeah. Oh, here we go. Keep going.
No, he was saying about, someone asked him, why do you wear a new pair of shoes every game? And he's like, well, you get a new pair of shoes. It's like, that's when you put them on, you're like, these are awesome. It's like that new fresh pair, so think of that in terms of like your fly line. Okay. It may be a year old, 6 months old. You've used it a lot, whatever. Clean it a little bit, put some stuff on it. You're going to notice it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Put your Cortland fly line dressing on it. It's a silicone lubricant. It's going to make the line slick.
It'll blow your mind how much dirt comes off your clean line.
Exactly.
It really will.
Yeah.
Even if, like you said,
you don't think that it's there, but it is.
Yeah.
Like I'll use this reference again, but we fish the upper Delaware system. It's a tailwater. The drinking water from New York City comes from those reservoirs. It is super clean, but there's a thing called algae in behind those dams, and it just destroys your line. It destroys your flies. And when you store lines that are dirty for 6 months and you get them back out the next year and you go fishing, you're like, man, this thing's just, I don't know what's wrong with this line. It just clean your damn line. All right. And it'll make it last a little bit longer. All right. That's it for kind of your general line discussion. Again, just shoot us an email if you're still kind of confused. Look at your tapers, look at your grain weights, look what kind of rod you have. Make an educated decision. If you can't, we'll help you out.
Grains don't equal density.
Look at your density too. Correct, Ricky. I'll never forget that when that guy goes, how are you fishing a 350 grain floating line?
Nothing's worse than asking somebody, hey, can I send you a line? Yeah, I need a 500 grain sink. It's like, all right.
Okay.
All
right.
Not sending you nothing.
I don't have many rapid fire questions, but I do have some. All right. So I will ask you, Nate, and you, Ricky, the same question. You have 3 seconds to answer, or you fail. There is a winner of this contest, and I will be the deciding factor on that. Okay. All right, Nate. You can only pick one rod size, one weight size to fish for the rest of your life. What is it?
5 weight.
Richard. You can only pick one rod size to fish for the rest of your life. What is it?
6 weight.
Nate, you can only pick one Cortland fly line to fish on your 5 weight the rest of your life. What is it?
SL.
I knew it. Ricky, you can only pick one Cortland fly line to fish on your 6 weight the rest of your life.
Finesse trout too.
Okay. You're going to use that SL for everything? Would you saltwater fish with it, with your 5 weight?
You could.
I mean, you'd have to.
Yeah. I mean, if that's all I had.
Catching mullet.
Okay. All right. Let's move on. I'll call that a draw. Nate, yes or no, the Jets make the playoffs this year?
No.
Richard, yes or no, the Jets make the playoffs this year?
Yes.
Okay.
You had to say that.
Scott, will you splice that clip in from last month's podcast? Okay. This would be a good time to do it. Play if he gets like the Jets quarterback. No offense.
Speaking of that, you don't even know who the Jets quarterback is anymore. Okay. You can't even say that. He's a Hall of Famer.
I need predictions right now before we get into the weeds of this podcast. Ricky, what's the Jets record this year? Regular season record. What are they going?
I think they're going 13-4.
13-4. My God.
Was that 18 game schedule now?
So
is it 17?
It does.
No, I think it's 18 1 week by 17 games.
Plus or minus. All right. So everyone knows Ricky is a huge Jets fan.
Absolutely.
I'm a closet Cowboys fan. I don't talk about that, but now that everyone knows. And Nate is a huge Bills fan. So it's great when Nate and Ricky are in the same office and the Jets and Bills because they're in the same division.
First game of the year.
I need a
Monday
prediction,
night.
Nate. What are the Bills going this year?
You said 13-4
for the Jets.
I'm gonna go with the same.
Okay. All right. You heard it here first, folks. 13-4 Jets, 13-4 Bills.
It's a bunch of dogs on that team.
I'm gonna flip flop this.
Hey, I told you the other night that I was cheering for the Jets.
I was too. I think everyone just feels bad for him. Let's keep going. You know what? Ricky's love for the Jets remind me of like his fantasy team too. Like after the draft, I'm like, how'd you think your draft went, Ricky? He's like, dude, my team's stacked.
The team is stacked.
And then like going into every going into every like preseason first game of the year, like how do you think the Jets are going to be? Oh, bro, we're making the Super Bowl.
No,
like they're okay.
Listen.
All right, let me get back. All right,
Okay.
this is the last rapid fire question. Okay, Ricky, yes or no? Bills make the Super Bowl?
Absolutely not.
Okay, Nate, no. Yes or no? Bills make the Super Bowl?
No comment.
Exactly.
Yes or no? Bills make the Super Bowl?
I'm too superstitious. Sorry.
Okay, Ricky's the winner of today's contest.
That's fine.
After this.
No confidence. No confidence.
Listen.
You guys did lose to Zach Wilson already.
We did.
So
we took your guy out in 4 plays.
All right.
Yeah. Well,
I'm gonna give pipe down, boys. I'm gonna give our listeners, because for those of you that do listen to our podcast, you get a sneak peek of some cool stuff. New products for 2024. All right.
Mm-hmm.
You ready for this? I'm just gonna run down a list of the new stuff for those of you that are listening before we actually come out with it. The Streamer Series, 10-foot streamer intermediate tip, available in a 5 through an 8 weight. All you hardcore bass anglers out there, we have a new bass line coming out this year in a 5 through a 9 weight. For all you hardcore bass fishermen, again, we have a new bass intermediate coming out in a 5 through a 9 weight. I'm not even going to give the details on this. I just want guys to get all gassed up on some of this stuff. Hardcore high vis flip fly line lovers, there is a new 5 weight coming out this year. So I know a lot of guys use that flip line for saltwater, freshwater, you name it. Look out for the new 5 weight. For all you baby tarpon fishing lovers out there, look for the 6 weight Tropic Plus tarpon line this year. And now the line that I chatted about earlier, the all-purpose Tropic Plus XP is available this year in a 7 through a 10 weight with 240 grains as a 7 weight, 280 as an 8, 350 as a 9, and 380 grains as a 10 weight.
It's heavy.
Hardcore striped bass, albie, bluefish guys. The striped bass series that we came out with last year, 2 years ago,
2 years ago,
with the exception of the striped bass sink 8. So the float, the intermediate, and the blitz. For those of you that love fishing, fly fishing, for schoolies, we're coming out with a 7 weight, okay, for that entire series. And the new Cold Salt Series clear tip, okay? That one's going to be your kind of your flats, your albies, your cold water redfish line. Mm-hmm. And this is kind
winter
of
bass line.
Winter bass line. This is the series that I'm really gassed up on. I know you are, Ricky, and I know you are, Nate, is the new 50 plus series from Cortland. Every single fly line in this series is built with a core strength that breaks over 50 pounds. And we kind of spun off of the GT line that we have. So listen to the following lines. The Giant Trevally, the Cannon. I love that. The Cannon. You ever had a line you cast it, you're like, man, this thing's a freaking cannon. Yeah, well, we got one now. It's called the Cannon. Okay, the intermediate, the heavy sink, and the billfish. So lines that start at 350 grains all the way up to 700 grains to the heavy sink, all built with a 50-pound braided nylon core. Tons of new leaders, the new Euro Nymph tapered leader in 3 different sizes. And you guys aren't going to want to miss this, but if you are big into the 444, the 444 Classic, and even the 333 series, we have a whole new range of boxes coming out. So be on the lookout for a change in the artwork on the boxes. There's a couple more add-ons that I'm going to kind of keep secret until you see them released on social media, Facebook, email blasts if you're on our email blasts. It's kind of all I have for this week, folks, or this month. Tons of new stuff coming out. I think some of it will slowly trickle out in a couple weeks in late October. And pretty much everything will be available, I'd say, through November and December for shipping, both at your local dealer and at cortlandline.com. Richard, thank you for your insight today on fly lines. Nate, you as well. Scotty, thanks for being the man behind the cameras. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, whatever it is, shoot us an email at info@cortlandline.com. Like I said, you got 6 super fishy guys that know what's going on here, and we'll be able to take care of any question that you have. Thanks for listening, folks. This is Cortland Hooked, the podcast.